All right, good afternoon. My name is Les Smith. I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. It's my pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to our next session in the Michigan Environmental Justice Conference. This session is entitled The New MiEJScreen, Why It Matters, and Now What? Now, before we get to our panel of presenters, I have a couple of housekeeping slides to go over with you. Just want to let you know that all of your lines are muted for the webinar. Also wanted to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, and we will share this recording with you later today or perhaps by tomorrow morning. So stay tuned for that. You can look for that in the Whova app or on Eagle's YouTube channel. If you have questions throughout this afternoon's presentation, you please feel free to type the questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you who are using the Whova app, you can go ahead and type your questions in the question box in Whova. And with that, I'd like to turn over this session over to Katie Cruz, who has some more opening remarks.
Thank you, Les, and welcome everyone. So for those that haven't joined previous sessions, I'm Katie Cruz. I'm the Environmental Justice and Tribal Liaison with the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate in Eagle. And I'm super excited and honored to have Charles Lee, Senior Policy Advisor for Environmental Justice with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and Dr. Paul Mohai, Professor in the School for Environment and Sustainability at the University of Michigan, join me here to talk about environmental justice screening and mapping tools. So we don't have a lot of time to list all of their many accomplishments, but these two great men are really pioneers in the field of environmental justice, and I'm really thankful for both of you being here, so thank you. I'm going to turn things over to Charles to start us off, and then Paul and myself will follow, and then hopefully we'll have an opportunity for a few questions at the end. Take it away, Charles.
Thank you, Katie, for that introduction. And I want to start by first thanking Katie for inviting me to be part of this panel, but also to make sure that I'm commending or congratulating her and Regina Strong and all of the Michigan Department of Environmental, Great Lakes, and Energy for this great conference. I mean, this is really a historic event. I had the opportunity to look at to view the opening session today, and I could really feel the energy and optimism and excitement about moving the work on environmental justice to a new level. So the second thing I want to say in starting and giving the background to this presentation is that this presentation based upon an article I wrote recently on lessons learned from state experience in advancing environmental justice and cumulative impact strategies is really a work in progress. And since I wrote that article and distilled these lessons, they are starting to come to life in many really exciting ways. So I do want to really kind of point that out as I'm beginning the presentation. So I am starting with talking about what many people know about already, CalEnviroScreen and EJScreen, which are, in my mind, my opinion, the second generational EJ maps that look at both pollution burden and population vulnerabilities. And in so doing, they have really begun to quantitatively provide information around environmental justice issues in a way that's never been done before. And you can see on this screen, the factors that are looked at in CalEnviroScreen, as well as the factors that are looked at in EJScreen. CalEnviroScreen does, on the left-hand side of the bottom part of the page, provide a cumulative score, so you are able to rank scores in the state of California cumulatively. However, I want to make sure to point out that both of them, even though MiEJScreen does not go to the point of being able to calculate a cumulative score, it does have a cumulative impact methodology, because they do combine both pollution factors and or environmental factors and population vulnerability or demographic factors. So there are 5 lessons that I wanted to make sure people knew about. 3 of these I'm going to talk about in detail as part of this presentation. But the other 2, in terms of having a set now of guiding principles for the development of state or EJ mapping tools, distilled from the California experience, as well as this idea that if you look at progress in state or environmental justice advancements overall during the last decade and a half, you will find that they have come about as a result of the combined efforts of communities, academia, and states. And it does take that in order to really get transformative action to take place. And we are seeing that now in all parts of the country. However, the 3 ones that I want to focus on are having to do with the 3 on top, and I will explain them. But we can also now understand that there are a historical arc having to do with EJ mapping. And I start with Screen and the MiEJScreen, like I said, but also during the past decade, there are 3 important statutes that have been passed in California, in Illinois, and in New York that have used these EJ mapping tools to direct significant resources, or the way I call it, resources of scale to EJ communities. And that has now translated into a major initiative on the federal level. President Biden issued Executive Order 14008 in January this year, and one of his major mandates was this Justice 40 initiative, and that stipulates that 40% of federal resources of climate and related resources should go to disadvantaged, underserved, marginalized, overburdened communities. And in order to do that, there's a call for direction for the development of a climate and economic justice screening tool. So going to the first lesson here that I wanted to really focus on, that I mentioned before, is that this idea that EJ mapping tools have facilitated real significant resource allocations. And we all know that communities with EJ concerns or the overburdened, disadvantaged, underserved communities are ones in which have suffered decades of disinvestment. And so one of the major strategies to try to address that is targeted investment of scale. And in California, as you can see here, in 2012, this bill called Senate Bill 535, calling for these directing of 25% of funds from the greenhouse gas reduction fund will go to benefit disadvantaged communities. These have now come to some $12 billion, at least 25% of which are going to disadvantaged communities. These is probably more than 25%, I am told, but I don't have the ability to track them specifically. And so that means that over the past decade, some more than $3 billion have been directed at these communities of EJ concern. The second focus I wanted to kind of highlight was the idea that at the core of the development of MiEJScreen is a cumulative impact strategy. That this is, as we all know, cumulative impacts is the holy grail of the environmental justice movement, and that this what the idea was advanced by communities in California and then adopted and embraced by Cal EPA. That formed the basis for the development of MiEJScreen. And importantly, it is not just those bills that then said that that MiEJScreen should be used to direct certain kinds of resources, but it has actually, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, been very influential in either in the crafting or the implementation of a whole number of statutes, some having to do with cumulative impacts, some having to do with the human right to water, having to do with incorporating EJ in general plans, and in the community air protection program. In Illinois, the a thing called the Future Energy Job Act was passed that stipulated 25% should go to EJ communities. Of 25% of a program called Solar for All should go to EJ communities, and there are resources of scale here as well. And this program stipulates $750 million go to low income areas. In New York, we stipulated the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, passed in 2019, stipulated 40% of resources benefit disadvantaged and overburdened communities. That is, being in the process of development in terms of program definitions, design, and criteria. So we go on to look at the larger picture. Now we have a proliferation as well as maturation of these second generation EJ mapping tools. These are actually examples of those are highlighted here on this slide. I am told that there's something like 19 under development, and these are not just at the state level, but also at the municipal level. Of course, one of those, and the focus of this session is in Michigan. Interestingly enough, there is a kind of common pattern that's emerging in terms of these mapping tool developments that has three elements, or they all have some version of three elements. The first of which is the use of the MiEJScreen methodology, data from MiEJScreen, which is of course nationally available, and then additional data that is available at the state or local level. So I want to switch gears and move on a little bit from that to look at new developments in mapping with respect to environmental justice, and that has to do with something that was kicked off or sparked by, precipitated by a thing called the Mapping Inequality Project, which made available the shapefiles for the redlined areas from the 1930s for some 200 cities. And here is, and I don't have time to go into this, in a lot of depth. Here's an overlay of MiEJScreen over those redlined areas for the city of Oakland, California, and you can see how the red areas, which are actually classified the D-hazardous or the worst areas, so the areas that are redlined and and were disinvested, and have a strong correlation with areas of great environmental disparities, and And there are a lot of other things, one of which is the fact that this information has sparked any number of studies, one of which correlated the red line areas for 108 cities with the location of urban heat islands. And so I want to stop there I can go on for a long time, but I just want to stop there because this gives you an overview in terms of general developments, past and present, and going into the future. And I want to stop or end with a set of questions about where the historical arc of EJ mapping will lead. So there's 4 questions I want to pose for everyone to think about as we are pursuing or continuing this journey towards better and better EJ mapping tools. The first is, how do we promote the information sharing, education, cross-fertilization with respect to data resources, lessons learned, and best practices? Second is, given the interdependent and innovative nature of the development of EJ mapping data and platforms, how can we develop strategies that maximize alignment, efficiency, and effectiveness? 3, given the fact that EJ applications or those decisions that affect EJ have multiple analytical requirements, how can we achieve the EJ mapping platforms that have what I would call a fit for purpose kind of capacity? And then lastly, of course, how can mapping be used to elucidate this all-important issue of systemic racism and environmental justice? So I want to stop there and stop sharing, and we can go on to Paul.
Thanks, Charles. Paul, we'll keep things moving.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Katie. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me talk about the Michigan environmental justice screening effort. I'm a professor at the University of Michigan and not part of the state government, but a team of actually 2 teams of my students did some of the initial work to investigate environmental justice screening tools that are currently in existence. And just like Charles was saying, the MiEJScreen and MiEJScreen have been around for some time, but their initial objective was to look at other possible screening tools out there, and essentially looking for best practices. And then how could the information already gathered from those existing tools be used as a prototype for creating an environmental justice screening tool in Michigan? And let's see. Oh, okay. All right. I wanted to advance the screen here. I have some historical facts, but I don't expect people to read that, so I'm going to move on from that. But anyway, the student teams investigated current environmental justice screening tools for best practices so as to serve as a model, possible model for Michigan. I want to also recognize the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, and especially Michelle Martinez, the coordinator for the coalition, who approached me and my school about the possibility of finding interested students to work on developing an environmental justice screening tool for Michigan. And it wasn't hard to find enthusiastic students and very bright and very dedicated and committed students for this project. And the work actually got spread out over 2 years. Laura Greer, Deli Mayer, and Brett Zoiner consisted of the first student team, and they work. I was their faculty advisor, and the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition was our partner and sponsor. What the students found was that MiEJScreen and MiEJScreen were among the most advanced. They also found some other screening tools from which they took best practice ideas to develop a prototype. And I'm going to discuss that result in a minute. but I also want to give acknowledgement to the second follow-up team who finished their work just last year. This consisted of Molly Blondell, Wakako Kobayashi, Brian Redden, and Ariana Sarsavi, who were looking at how environmental justice screening tools were being used in other states around the country. And I have links to their reports, which are open access, and I'll try to drop the links into the chat so people can access the reports. But my presentation is essentially based on their work. So one of the things, as Charles was mentioning, a lot of the current state efforts are looking to MiEJScreen for a lot of the base data. One of the challenges for EPA and the federal government is to collect information that can be applied to all 50 states. And what became apparent to me when I was on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council is it's very difficult to get states to report data that's in a consistent format that can be then reapplied to the whole U.S. Nationally. And I want to just comment, I think that's one of the reasons why state-specific environmental justice screening tools will be very important. I don't think the federal level efforts will be enough. I know there's efforts right now to try to enhance MiEJScreen as a national tool, but again, I think the states have their own specific data. They organize it in their own ways. And things like health data, which are oftentimes considered confidential, are more likely to be used at the state level because you can get information at a small geographic unit like a census tract. So for example, where Cal EnviroScreen uses the concept of sensitive populations where they're collecting health data, asthma data, cardiovascular data, low birth weight data, they use it in Cal EnviroScreen, but you won't find those indicators in MiEJScreen, for example. One of the things that Cal EnviroScreen does not have, which MiEJScreen does have, and I think this is a really important thing to note, is that MiEJScreen takes into account the minority populations in the census tracts. Cal EnviroScreen does not. I think it's enormously important to include this variable because all the recent quantitative studies that have been using geographic information systems and more sophisticated methods than some of the earlier studies show that race has an added impact on in terms of where environmental burdens are concentrated, and racial disparities are just not explained entirely by socioeconomic factors, although they too are important. I don't want to minimize those, but anyway, MiEJScreen includes a variable for race, and so does the student's recommendation. And I think Katie will be speaking to this in terms of what the state has actually employed here. I have an example I'm going to skip over. This example was mainly to show how effective that the tool is to identify census tracts that have both high burdens as well as low or high social vulnerability. So tracts that have high estimated cancer risk or respiratory risk, or have high proportions of people living in poverty. The tool picks it up. This is exactly what we want in a tool. We don't want a tool where the underlying numbers don't make any sense when we start digging down into them. So I'm going to skip over that because there's so much other things to say here. This is a map of Michigan where the students had color coded the map, where red means these are the census tracts in Michigan with the highest environmental justice scores, and the green have the lowest, and you can see a lot of the urban areas coming through. The students also included all tribal areas in Michigan, which is not included in either MiEJScreen or Cal EnviroScreen, but could be easily added to a screening tool. I want to mention a couple things pertaining to policy. This I have not heard a lot of discussion, but I see a lot of potential for the screening tools to both shape environmental justice policy, but I think they also have a lot of potential in measuring whether we're actually seeing improvements on the ground. So I want to discuss that for just a second. All right, one of the things that the students did was they sorted all the census tracts in Michigan, and there's something like 2,817 in terms of their score from lowest to highest. And you can see the horizontal bar just represents the median score, which was 23.3. And then they're showing the score, or the census tract scores that sorted into percentiles from the least impacted to the most impacted. One of the things that if you look at that graph and think about what that graph means, if we had a perfectly equitable world, those bars, those blue bars, should not be deviating from the horizontal bar at all. They all should be lying flat with that bar. There should be no deviation. And because of that, and as you can see, it's not even linear. As you go to the right here, the further to the right, the environmental justice EJ scores increase at an exponential rate, meaning that the census tracts that are bad off get increasingly bad off at a faster rate the further to the right you go here. When you realize that in a perfectly equitable world, there shouldn't be any deviations, this graph presents an opportunity to see how you could actually measure future progress. And one way to do it would be to use the concept, the statistical concept of standard deviation. If we were in a perfectly fair, equitable, just world, those bars would be flat with the line and the standard deviation would be 0. So you wouldn't see any deviations from the bar. We're not going to achieve that overnight, obviously, but you can use the standard deviation value to see if you're making progress, because you can see whether the standard deviation is approaching 0. So no matter what the standard deviation is now, and I had it somewhere in the report, I forgot to extract it, we could actually measure progress to see if that standard deviation score is becoming smaller and approaching 0. So I think these screening tools have a potential for measuring progress. And in my opinion, if we don't have any way to quantify whether or not we're making progress, then I sincerely believe that anything we're calling environmental justice policy is just a declaration of good intentions. We have to be able to prove, we have to be able to give evidence that real progress is being made. I'm going to make one final comment and then I'll stop. And MiEJScreen draws a line at the 25th percentile. So census tracts that have a higher score above the 25th percentile in this region here get treated pretty much the same way. They're given equal priority in terms of being targeted for investments from the Greenhouse Reduction Fund. And what I'd like people to think about is there's not just one threshold here. As I said, these bars get bigger at an exponential rate. We should give priority to the worst off places. So if you look at the top 1 percentile of the worst places in terms of the EJ score, in terms of environmental burden and social vulnerability, that score is over 60, whereas right at the 25 percentile line, it's 20. The score is 25. So there's a big difference between here and here. And one of the things we should think about is really starting off with what we know are the worst places and put our efforts in those places first, and then maybe go to the second percentile, third percentile, 5th, 10th, 15th, all the way down to 25th. So MiEJScreen, I think Charles mentioned, doesn't employ any of these kind of thresholds. MiEJScreen does. I think to implement President Biden's 40% rule, there's going to have to be a threshold or multiple thresholds, and I would argue for multiple thresholds. And then finally, let me just say, in terms of more general recommendations, I've included 4 that one I've already discussed. We can use MiEJScreen tools to make policy decisions. We need to involve communities in developing EJ screening tools, and we also need to provide workshops and seminars to demonstrate how these tools work so people understand them. We need to update the data in these tools more frequently than they currently are. Some data are not updated for 3, 5, or more years. And if we don't update the data, I would want us to see us update the data annually, because that's the best way we would know that a policy decision actually had an impact. And then finally, I also want to mention false negatives, and that is, and I have more details, so I'm going to go to the false negative slide just to better explain what I mean. EJ screening tools take into account only characteristics where data are collected, and communities may experience impacts not accounted for by existing data and tools. So what that means is that, well, if a census tract gets a low score, it doesn't mean it does not have an environmental justice problem. That's a false negative if we assume that it did not. So how do we avoid the false negatives? One is that we try to expand the list of important characteristics defining EJ communities and collect data on them. And we also need to think about ways in which EJ communities can self-identify. That was a recommendation that my students put into their report. I don't have a recommendation yet on how to do that, but that is something that all of us should need to think about. How do we identify communities in cases where the data don't cover their particular problem or issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul and Charles. All right, so I'm going to be talking about the development of Michigan's MiEJScreen. Get my presentation up here. All right. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the background, since Charles and Paul did a great job of kind of covering kind of the way things are happening at the national level, as well as the work that has been done here in Michigan. But I did want to recognize that, due to the EJ work group recommendation and the work of students at the University of Michigan, the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate and the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team identified the development of a tool as a priority. So in case you're not familiar and you weren't in a previous session, I just wanted to show the organizational structure of the work. So the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate resides in Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, but is considered a type 1 agency with a direct link to the governor's office. The Interagency EJ Response Team includes representation from essentially all state agencies and was created with the goal of assuring all Michigan residents benefit equitably from the protections and policies of state government. The MAC-EJ, or the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, advises the work of both the office and the response team. So through our response team, we have 4 work groups that are working to advance the priorities of the office, including the research and data work group, whose focus has been on the development of MiEJScreen. So the purpose is to develop a Michigan-specific tool to identify communities most affected by cumulative environmental health impacts, as well as provide decision makers and advocates current, easy to understand data on environmental conditions and vulnerable populations to inform policy and resource allocation decisions that can best address environmental justice issues and move towards achieving environmental justice. Here in Michigan, as you heard from Charles, like several other states, including California, we do not have legislation driving the development of the tool, and therefore we don't have a lot of resources or staff times to devote to the development, but luckily a lot of this work has already been done. So we started the process by examining, as Paul mentioned, the best practices in environmental justice mapping tools, such as California's MiEJScreen, US EPA's MiEJScreen, and similar tools in other states and municipalities, sorry, I cannot talk today, to utilize existing methodologies and tool functionalities. So we collaborated with various state departments through our interagency work group to gather data for the tool itself, including Eagle, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, Michigan State Housing Development Authority, Michigan Department of Transportation, and the Michigan Public Service Commission. We also developed a multi-department review team to provide internal review of the tool. We recognize the importance of community input and stakeholder involvement in the development of the tool. As part of the development process, we've sought input from various stakeholders, including the MiEJ and participants of the 8 regional roundtables held across the state that we just wrapped up last week. So you may have heard about it in our previous session. The draft tool will also be released for public review and comment in the coming months. The scoring methodology is based on California's MiEJScreen, which uses a science-based method for evaluating multiple pollution sources in a community while accounting for the community's vulnerability to pollution's adverse effects, considering the socioeconomic and health status of people living in those communities. So this model provides relative information for the entire state on a geographic basis. Here we're using the census tract level. Using this model, MiEJScreen includes 2 components representing environmental conditions. So those are environmental exposures and environmental effects, and 2 components representing population characteristics, including sensitive populations and socioeconomic factors. Each of the components has a set of indicators that are scored for each census tract by its raw value, then assigned percentiles based on rank order. Those percentiles are averaged for each of the 4 components. So for the exposures, the environmental effects, the sensitive populations, and the socioeconomic factors. And the formula below is used to combine the scores for each component to calculate the overall MiEJ score. So where the averages of exposures and environmental effects is multiplied by the averages of sensitive populations and socioeconomic factors. So I don't have a lot of time to go into all the indicators that we're looking at for MiEJScreen, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of detail on some more information on what indicators we're using. So as Charles talked about, using this California methodology plus data from EPA's MiEJScreen and local state data is exactly what we're doing here in Michigan. So for the environmental exposure indicators, we are utilizing air quality data, primarily from EPA's MiEJScreen, as well as a traffic density indicator. For our environmental effects indicators, we're utilizing a lot of proximity indicators. So we're using California's scoring methodology with our data. So for instance, the cleanup indicator includes proximity to Eagle's Part 201 cleanup sites, to Part 213 leaking underground storage tank sites, and to Superfund sites. Our sensitive population indicators, so it includes health information, working with DHHS to get this data, as well as the national data set that was developed on life expectancy, and then blood lead level, so the percent of tested children with elevated blood lead levels. And to our knowledge, we're the only state that are including these 2 indicators on the bottom. Finally, the socioeconomic indicators, really here we're utilizing the most recent 5-year estimates of census data for a variety of factors. So here's a screenshot of the tool itself. So here you can see that the cumulative MiEJ score based on percentiles. So the red darker areas are the higher percentile, the dark blue areas, the lower percentile. But what I wanted to show here too is that this tool provides the user to kind of drill down on those scores. So we have the overall score, but you can also look at any of the 2 larger buckets or the components themselves right down to the indicator level. We are also including what we're calling context layers. So these are additional data and indicators that aren't included in the score, but that are useful to be able to overlay onto the map. So Charles showed you kind of what California did with the redlining maps and the EJ score. So we do have the redlining maps as one of our context layers. Next step. So the tool is currently undergoing internal review. As I mentioned previously, the draft version will be available for public comment early summer. Once we review and incorporate public comment, we're hoping to have a final version available fall of 2021. We also plan to update the tool as new data and methodologies are developed, and are really excited to see what is to come with the work that's being done at the federal level. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I know we've only got like 3 minutes. So take a quick look at some of the questions that came in. So one of the questions that I think we get this a lot is, when is the EJ tool used? And I know Charles talked a little bit about legislation that drives the use of the tool. You know, as I mentioned, we don't have that here in Michigan, but I think we have a real opportunity with our interagency response team to really look at innovative ways to kind of pull our resources together to address this disparities in communities. And as Michigan's tool is finalized and developed, we know that, you know, as we work on this, a lot of the ways the tool are going to be used will, you know, be developed as it comes out. But I don't know, Charles,
Sure.
I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the fit for purpose, because I think that's important.
I mean, this is a longer conversation, but I mean, I can just start it off by saying that, you know, the uses of EJ screening tools have grown. And originally, when both count viral screening and EJ screening were issued, it was really just meant for screening purposes, or identifying places that have that merit more attention in terms of resources, or in terms of outreach or further investigation. Then, you know, resources were, if it was found that they actually could be used for directing resources. They've also been used for things like as one important data factor, data point in identifying where you prioritize the programmatic attention, like enforcement, say targeting, is just one example of that. And, you know, you can go on from there. You know, and of course, you know, to what degree they're going to be used in a strictly regulatory sense, like environmental permitting, or, you know, we shall, you know, we'll see. They are also have been used to provide data for you know, the writing of environmental rules. There's going to be a lot of other uses that are going to come about as a result of this. But that's just a starting point in terms of just you know, a quick answer.
Thanks, Charles. And I know we're right up on 3 o'clock. So Les, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap up the session. And just to mention, we will be getting these additional questions, so we'll be answering those as we move along after the session as well.
All right, Katie, thank you. And thank you to our team, Dr. Paul and Charles. Thank you so much for your presentation. Coming up at, well, I guess before we get to that, please take the time today to rate the session in the Whova app. You can actually find the ratings and session review at the conclusion of this webinar. Also, I wanted to let you know, coming up at 3:30 today. So what are you saying? This presentation coming up at 3:30 talks about the value of plain language and why it's useful from an environmental justice standpoint in communicating environmental risk. So stay tuned for that at 3:30 today. And thank you for joining us today, and we will see you at the next session. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.